When my captor appeared again, he was in the fabled long white robes, and his coarse blonde hair had been combed, and he looked immaculate and impressive and solemn. There were other tall white-robed men, some old, some young, and all with the same gleaming yellow hair, who came into the small shadowy room behind him. In a silent circle they enclosed me, and after a protracted silence a riff of whispers passed amongst them. "You are perfect for the god," said the eldest, and I saw the silent pleasure in the one who had brought me here. "You are what the god has asked for," the eldest said. "You will remain with us until the great feast of Samhain, and then you will be taken to the sacred grove, and there you will drink the divine blood. And you will become a father of gods, a restorer of all the magic that has inexplicably been taken from us." "And will my body die when this happens?" I asked. I was looking at them, their sharp narrow faces, their probing eyes, the gaunt grace with which they surrounded me. What a terror this race must have been when its warriors swept down on the Mediterranean peoples. No wonder there had been so much written about their fearlessness. But these weren't warriors, these were priests, judges, and teachers. These were the instructors of the young, the keepers of the poetry, and the laws that were never written in any language. "Only the mortal part of you will die," said the one who had spoken to me all along. "Bad luck," I said, "since that's about all there is to me." "No," he said, "your form will remain and it will become glorified. You will see. Don't fear. And besides, there is nothing you can do to change these things. Until the feast of Samhain, you will let your hair grow long, and you will learn our tongue and our hymns and our laws. We will care for you. My name is Mael, and I myself will teach you. But I am not willing to become the god," I said. "Surely the gods don't want one who is unwilling." "The old god will decide," said Mael, "but I know that when you drink the divine blood you will become the god, and all things will be clear to you." Escape was impossible. I was guarded night and day. I was allowed no knife with which I might cut off my hair or otherwise damage myself. And a good deal of the time I lay in the dark, empty room, drunk on wheaten beer and satiated with the rich roasted meats they gave to me. I had nothing with which to write, and this tortured me. Out of boredom, I listened to Mael when he came to instruct me. I let him sing anthems to me and tell me old poems and talk on about laws, only now and then taunting him with the obvious fact that a god should not have to be so instructed. This he conceded, but what could he do but try to make me understand what would happen to me? "You can help me get out of here. You can come with me to Rome," I said. "I have a villa, all my own, on the cliffs above the Bay of Naples. You have never seen such a beautiful spot, and I would let you live there forever if you would help me, asking only that you repeat all these anthems and prayers and laws to me so that I might record them." "Why do you try to corrupt me?" he would ask, but I could see he was tantalized by the world I came from. He confessed that he had searched the Greek city of Massilia for weeks before my arrival, and he loved the Roman wine and the great ships that he had seen in the port, and the exotic foods he had eaten. "I don't try to corrupt you," I said. "I don't believe what you believe, and you've made me your prisoner." But I continued to listen to his prayers out of boredom and curiosity and the vague fear of what was in store for me. I began waiting for him to come, for his pale, wraith-like figure to illuminate the barren room, like a white light for his quiet, measured voice to pour forth with all the old melodious nonsense. It soon came clear that his verses did not unfold continuous stories of the gods as we knew them in Greek and Latin, but the identity and characteristics of the gods began to emerge in the many stanzas. Deities of all the predictable sorts belonged to the tribe of the heavens, but the god I was to become exerted the greatest hold over Mael and those he instructed. He had no name, this god, though he had numerous titles, and the drinker of the blood was the most often repeated. He was also the White One, the god of the night, the god of the oak, the lover of the mother. This god took blood sacrifice at every full moon. But on Samhain, the 1st of November in our present Christian calendar, the day that has become the Feast of All Saints, or the Day of the Dead, this god would accept the greatest number of human sacrifices before the whole tribe, for the increase of the crops, as well as speak all manner of predictions and judgments. It was the Great Mother he served, she who is without visible form, but nevertheless present in all things, and the mother of all things, of the earth, of the trees, of the sky overhead, of all men, of the drinker of the blood himself who walks in her garden. My interest deepened, but so did my apprehension. The worship of the Great Mother was certainly not unknown to me. The Mother Earth and the Mother of all things was worshipped under a dozen names, from one end of the empire to the other, and so was her lover and son, her dying god, the one who grew to manhood as the crops grow, only to be cut down as the crops are cut down, while the Mother remains eternal. It was the ancient and gentle myth of the seasons, but the celebration anywhere and at any time was hardly ever gentle. For the Divine Mother was also death, the earth that swallows the remains of that young lover, the earth that swallows all of us. And in consonance with this ancient truth, old as the sowing of seed itself, there came 1,000 bloody rituals. The goddess was worshipped under the name of Cybele in Rome, and I had seen her, mad priests, castrating themselves in the midst of their devoted frenzy. And the gods of myth met their ends even more violently. Attis gelded, Dionysus rent limb from limb, the old Egyptian Osiris dismembered before the great Mother Isis restored him. And now I was to be that god of growing things, the vine god, the corn god, the god of the tree, and I knew that whatever happened it was going to be something appalling. And what was there to do but get drunk and murmur these anthems with Mael, whose eyes would cloud with tears from time to time as he looked at me. "Get me out of here, you wretch," I said once in pure exasperation. "Why the hell don't you become the god of the tree? Why am I so honored? I have told you, the god confided to me his wishes. I wasn't chosen." "And would you do it if you were chosen?" I demanded. I was sick of hearing of these old rites by which any man threatened by illness or misfortune must serve up a human sacrifice to the god if he wished to be spared, and all the other sacrosanct beliefs that had to them the same childlike barbarity. "I would fear, but I would accept," he whispered. "But do you know what is so terrible about your fate? It is that your soul will be locked in your body forever. It will have no chance in natural death to pass into another body or another lifetime. No, all through time your soul will be the soul of the god. The cycle of death and rebirth will be closed in you." In spite of myself and my general contempt for his belief and reincarnation, this silenced me. I felt the eerie weight of his conviction. I felt his sadness. My hair grew longer and fuller, and the hot summer melted into the cooler days of fall, and we were nearing the great annual feast of Samhain. Yet I wouldn't let up on the questions. How many have you brought to be gods in this manner? What was it in me that caused you to choose me? "I have never brought a man to be a god," he said, "but the god is old. He is robbed of his magic. A terrible calamity has befallen him, and I can't speak of these things. He has chosen his successor. He looked frightened. He was saying too much. Something was stirring the deepest fears in him." "And how do you know he will want me? Have you 60 other candidates stashed in this fortress?" He shook his head, and in a moment of uncharacteristic rawness he said, "Marius, if you fail to drink the blood, if you do not become the father of a new race of gods, what will become of us?" "I wish I could care, my friend," I said. "Ah, calamity," he whispered, and there followed a long subdued observation of the rise of Rome, the terrible invasions of Caesar, the decline of a people who had lived in these mountains and forests since the beginning of time, scorning the cities of the Greek and the Etruscan and the Roman for the honorable strongholds of powerful tribal leaders. "Civilizations rise and fall, my friend," I said. "Old gods give way to new ones." "You don't understand, Marius," he said. "Our God was not defeated by your idols. And those who tell their frivolous and lascivious stories, our God was as beautiful as if the moon itself had fashioned him with her light. And he spoke with a voice that was as pure as the light, and he guided us in that great oneness with all things that is the only cessation of despair and loneliness. But he was stricken with terrible calamity, and all through the north country other gods have perished completely. It was the revenge of the sun god upon him. But how the sun entered into him in the hours of darkness and sleep is not known to us nor to him. You are our salvation, Marius. You are the mortal who knows and is learned and can learn, and who can go down into Egypt." I thought about this. I thought of the old worship of Isis and Osiris, and of those who said she was the Mother Earth, and he the corn, and Typhon, the slayer of Osiris, was the fire of the sunlight. And now this pious communicator with the god was telling me that the sun had found his god of the night and caused great calamity. Finally my reason gave out on me. Too many days passed in drunkenness and solitude. I lay down in the dark and I sang to myself the hymns of the Great Mother. She was no goddess to me, however, not Diana, of Ephesus with her rows and rows of milk-filled breasts, or the terrible Cybele, or even the gentle Demeter, whose mourning for Persephone in the land of the dead had inspired the sacred mysteries of Ulysses. She was the strong, good earth that I smelled through the small barred windows of this place, the wind that carried with it the damp and the sweetness of the dark green forest. She was the meadow flowers and the blowing grass, the water I heard now and then gushing, as if from some mountain spring. She was all the things that I still had in this rude little wooden room where everything else had been taken from me. And I knew only what all men know, that the cycle of winter and spring in all growing things has within itself some sublime truth that restores without myth or language. I looked through the bars to the stars overhead, and it seemed to me I was dying in the most absurd and foolish way, among people I did not admire, and customs I would have abolished. And yet the seeming sanctity of it all infected me. It caused me to dramatize and to dream and to give in, to see myself at the center of something that possessed its own exalted beauty. I sat up one morning and touched my hair and realized it was thick and curling at my shoulders. And in the days that followed, there was endless noise and movement in the fortress. Carts were coming to the gates from all directions. Thousands on foot passed inside. Every hour there was the sound of people on the move, people coming. At last Mael and 8 of the Druids came to me. Their robes were white and fresh, smelling of the spring water and sunshine, in which they'd been washed and dried, and their hair was brushed and shining. Carefully they shaved all the hair from my chin and upper lip. They trimmed my fingernails. They brushed my hair and put on me the same white robes. And then, shielding me on all sides with white veils, they passed me out of the house and into a white canopied wagon. I glimpsed other robed men holding back an enormous crowd, and I realized for the first time that only a select few of the Druids had been allowed to see me. Once Mael and I were under the canopy of the cart, the flaps were closed and we were completely hidden. We seated ourselves on rude benches as the wagon started to move, and we rode for hours without speaking. Occasional rays of sun pierced the white fabric of the tent-like enclosure, and when I put my face close to the cloth, I could see the forest deeper, thicker than I remembered. And behind us came an endless train and great wagons of men who clung to wooden bars and cried out to be released, their voices commingling in an awful chorus. "Who are they? Why do they cry like that?" I asked finally. I couldn't stand the tension any longer. Mael roused himself as if from a dream. "They are evildoers, thieves, murderers, all justly condemned, and they shall perish in sacred sacrifice." Loathsome, I muttered. But was it? We condemned our criminals to die on crosses in Rome, to be burnt at the stake, to suffer all manner of cruelties. Did it make us more civilized that we didn't call it a religious sacrifice? Maybe the Keltoi were wiser than we were in not wasting the deaths, but this was nonsense. My head was light, the cart was creeping along. I could hear those who passed us on foot as well as on horseback, everyone going to the festival of Samhain. I was about to die. I didn't want it to be fire. Mael looked pale and frightened, and the wailing of the men in the prison carts was driving me to the edge of madness. What would I think when the fire was lighted? What would I think when I felt myself start to burn? I couldn't stand this. "What is going to happen to me?" I demanded suddenly. I had the urge to strangle Mael. He looked up and his brows moved ever so slightly. "What if the god is already dead?" he whispered. "Then we go to Rome, you and I, and we get drunk together on good Italian wine," I whispered. It was late afternoon when the cart came to a stop. The noise seemed to rise like steam all around us. When I went to look out, Mael didn't stop me. I saw we had come to an immense clearing hemmed on all sides by the giant oaks. All the carts, including ours, were backed into the trees, and in the middle of the clearing hundreds worked at some enterprise involving endless bundles of sticks and miles of rope and hundreds of great rough-hewn tree trunks. The biggest and longest logs I had ever seen were being hefted upright in 2 giant X's. The woods were alive with those who watched. The clearing could not contain the multitudes. Yet more and more carts wound their way through the press to find a spot at the edges of the forest. I sat back and pretended to myself that I did not know what they were doing out there, but I did. And before the sunset I heard louder and more desperate screams from those in the prison carts. It was almost dusk, and when Mael lifted the flap for me to see, I stared in horror at 2 gargantuan wicker figures, a man and a woman it seemed. From the mass of vines that suggested dress and hair constructed all of logs and osiers and ropes and filled from top to bottom with the bound and writhing bodies of the condemned who screamed in supplication. I was speechless looking at these 2 monstrous giants. I could not count the number of wriggling human bodies they held, victims stuffed into the hollow framework of their enormous legs, their torsos, their arms, even their hands, and even into their immense and faceless cage-like heads, which were crowned with ivy leaves and flowers. Ropes of flowers made up the woman's gown, and stalks of wheat were stuffed into the man's great belt of ivy. The figures shivered as if they might at any moment fall, but I knew the powerful cross scaffolding of timbers supported them, as they appeared to tower over the distant forest. And all around the feet of these figures were stacked the bundles of kindling and pitch-soaked wood that would soon ignite them. And all these must die, are guilty of some wrongdoing. You wish me to believe that? I asked of Mael. He nodded with his usual solemnity. This didn't concern him. They have waited months, some years, to be sacrificed, he said, almost indifferently. They come from all over the land, and they cannot change their fate any more than we can change ours. It is to perish in the forms of the Great Mother and her lover. I was becoming ever more desperate. I should have done anything to escape, but even now some 20 druids surrounded the cart, and beyond them was a legion of warriors, and the crowd itself went so far back into the trees that I could see no end to it. Darkness was falling quickly, and everywhere torches were being lighted. I could feel the roar of excited voices. The screams of the condemned grew ever more piercing and beseeching. I sat still and tried to deliver my mind from panic. If I could not escape, then I would meet these strange ceremonies with some degree of calm. And when it came clear what a sham they were, I would, with dignity and righteousness, pronounce my judgments loud enough for others to hear them. That would be my last act, the act of the god, and it must be done with authority, or else it would do nothing in the scheme of things. The cart began to move. There was much noise, shouting, and Mael rose and took my arm and steadied me. When the flap was open, we had come to a stop deep in the woods many yards from the clearing. I glanced back at the lurid sight of the immense figures, torchlight glinting on the swarm of pathetic movement inside them. They seemed animate, these horrors, like things that would suddenly start to walk and crush all of us. The play of light and shadow on those stuffed into the giant heads gave a false impression of hideous faces. I couldn't make myself turn away from it, and from the sight of the crowd gathered all around, but Mael tightened his grip on my arm and said that I must come now to the sanctuary of the god with the elect of the priesthood. The others closed me in, obviously trying to conceal me. I realized the crowd did not know what was happening now. In all likelihood, they knew only that the sacrifices would soon begin, and some manifestation of the god would be claimed by the druids. Only one of the band carried a torch, and he led the way deeper into the evening darkness, Mael at my side and other white-robed figures ahead of me, flanking me and behind me. It was still, it was damp, and the trees rose to such dizzying heights against the vanishing glow of the distant sky that they seemed to be growing, even as I looked up at them. I could run now, I thought, but how far would I get before this entire race of people came thundering after me? But we had come into a grove, and I saw, in the feeble light of the flames, dreadful faces carved into the barks of the trees and human skulls on stakes grinning in the shadows. In carved-out tree trunks were other skulls in rows piled one row upon another. In fact, the place was a regular charnel house, and the silence that enclosed us seemed to give life to these horrid things, to let them speak suddenly. I tried to shake the illusion, the sense that these staring skulls were watching. There is no one really watching, I thought. There is no continuous awareness of anything. But we had paused before a gnarled oak of such enormous girth that I doubted my senses. How old it must have been, this tree, to have grown to such width I couldn't imagine. But when I looked up, I saw that its soaring limbs were still alive. It was still in green leaf, and the living mistletoe everywhere decorated it. The druids had stepped away to right and left. Only Mael remained near me, and I stood facing the oak with Mael at my far right, and I saw that hundreds of bouquets of flowers had been laid at the base of the tree, their little blooms barely showing any color anymore in gathering shadows. Mael had bowed his head, his eyes were closed, and it seemed the others were in the same attitude, and their bodies were trembling. I felt the cool breeze stir the green grass. I heard the leaves ail around us, carry the breeze in a loud and long sigh that died away as it had come in the forest. And then very distinctly I heard words spoken in the dark that had no sound to them. They came undeniably from within the tree itself, and they asked whether or not all the conditions had been met by him who would drink the divine blood tonight. For a moment I thought that I was going mad. They had drugged me, but I had drunk nothing since morning. My head was clear, too painfully clear, and I heard the silent pulse of this personage again, and it was asking questions. He is a man of learning? Mael's slender form seemed to shimmer as surely he expressed the answer. And the faces of the others had become rapt, their eyes fixed on the great oak, the flutter of the torch the only movement. Can he go down into Egypt? I saw Mael nod, and the tears rose in his eyes and his pale throat moved as he swallowed. Yes, I live, my faithful one, and I speak, and you have done well, and I shall make the new god. Send him in to me. I was too astonished to speak, and I had nothing to say either. Everything had changed. Everything that I believed, depended upon, had suddenly been called into question. I hadn't the slightest fear, only paralyzing amazement. Mael took me by the arm. The other Druids came to assist him, and I was led around the oak, clear of the flowers heaped at its roots, until we stood behind it, before a huge pile of stones banked against it. The grove had its carved images on this side as well, its troves of skulls, and the pale figures of Druids whom I had not seen before. And it was these men, some with long white beards, who drifted forward to lay their hands on the stones and start to remove them. Mael and the others worked with them, silently lifting these great rocks and casting them aside, some of the stones so heavy that 3 men had to lift them. And finally there was revealed in the base of the oak a heavy doorway of iron, with huge locks over it. Mael drew out an iron key, and he said some long words in the language of the Keltoi, to which the others gave responses. Mael's hand was shaking, but he soon had all the locks undone, and then it took 4 of the Druids to pull back the door. And then the torch-bearer lighted another brand for me and placed it in my hands, and Mael said, Enter, Marius. In the wavering light we glanced at each other. He seemed a helpless creature. Unable to move his limbs, though his heart brimmed as he looked at me, I knew now the barest glimpse of the wonder that had shaped him and inflamed him, and was utterly humbled and baffled by its origins. But from within the tree, from the darkness beyond this rudely cut doorway, there came the silent one again. Do not be afraid, Marius. I wait for you. Take the light and come to me.